Hello darlings, I hope you're well. So I want to do a video on self-diagnosing. There's already some great videos out there on YouTube. It's a very controversial topic. I'm going to try and be understanding to both sides of the argument. I say in my disclaimer that I'm against self-diagnosing, but I am going to go into, the pros of self-diagnosing as well, why people do it. If you disagree with anything, feel free to comment. I'd love to hear your opinions. I'm going to start by explaining my disclaimer. It sounds harsh. Your opposing opinion is also valid. I say I'm not a professional. Don't use my videos as a replacement for professional help, obviously. BPD self-diagnosis isn't real because it's one of the hardest to diagnose. Your pain is valid, so please get help. It is true that BPD is one of the hardest mental illnesses to diagnose, but that being said, self-diagnosis does take a lot of research. If you think you have BPD, you could have BPD, it's likely that you have BPD. The only problem I have is when self-diagnosed people go around saying, I have BPD. Even if in your heart you're certain, I'd prefer it if you said, I likely have BPD, or it's likely I have borderline personality disorder. I think just changing the language a bit helps. Here's the argument for self-diagnosing. The mental health care system is completely flawed. In the UK, there's really long waiting lists. I know many people are a lot less likely to get help than other people. For example, men, people of colour are less likely to get a diagnosis. It costs money. In the UK, therapy is for free. I'm not saying it's good because of the waiting lists and stuff. It's actually so flawed. Mental health care is not accessible to everyone. Think about how expensive it is in America. Not anyone can afford that. I have that privilege, and I feel like I always say, go get professional help because professional help is so important. But not anyone and everyone can access professional help. And in a perfect world, everyone would be allowed therapy for free. Unfortunately, it's not accessible for everyone. I do have a lot of compassion for people who are self-diagnosed. If you break your leg, you don't really need a diagnosis to know if it's broken. Sometimes you just know that your leg is broken. No one else knows your mind as well as you do. At the same time, doctors are doctors for a reason, and they've studied years. They have a lot of education behind them. It's do you know more than a doctor does? But like I said at the beginning, I think language is so important, and if you are self-diagnosed, just say, I'm not diagnosed, but I think I have this. For people who have been diagnosed, we see comments all the time saying, I'm so scared I have what you have. I'm so scared I have BPD. That can almost be offensive to us because it's something we live with and it's not something that goes away. It's a chronic illness. So when I get a comment, I'm so scared I have this, it can feel a bit disrespectful. Just be careful about how you say things, especially if you haven't been diagnosed. No, it's a privilege to have a diagnosis. It's a literal privilege. But at the same time, it's hard to know what's real, because think about how trendy mental illness has become. I don't recommend using TikTok if you're mentally ill. TikTok is so bad for your mind. But for example, how BPD is so glamorized on TikTok. People think they're edgy e-girls, edgy illness, and I feel people almost want it. It isn't something you want. I'm not trying to invalidate people who haven't been diagnosed and people who can't afford therapy. Marginalized people are a lot less likely to get diagnosed, so that is literally so fucking valid, and your pain is so real. What you're going through isn't made up just because you're not diagnosed. People who have a diagnosis were initially not diagnosed with that, if that makes sense. So we all start from nothing, and we all start from no diagnosis. For years and years I was struggling, and I knew something was wrong, and I could kind of accumulate ideas and do research and assume I had BPD and stuff. People with diagnoses have lived a life without them, even though they were living with the same diagnosis, without the diagnosis. It's important when you're self-diagnosed to say, I am self-diagnosed. You don't want the stigma. You don't want this illness, not only because it's painful in itself, but because the stigma is bad. I get comments daily basically saying, you're evil, you're manipulative. It's you don't know me. You've never met me. I have healthy relationships. I'm a loving person. We are also empathetic, yet we still get grouped and lumped together with evil people and being told we're evil all the time. You don't want this illness, and you don't want the stigma attached to it. I actually do think self-diagnosis is okay, as long as it's not, I'm 100% sure I have this. As long as you're not taking it as 100% of the truth, I think you're good. Like I keep saying, BPD is the hardest mental illness to diagnose. BPD has the same death rate as a certain cancer. and this is just like an idea I want to throw out there, you wouldn't self-diagnose yourself with cancer. I did say like if your leg is broken, you know it's broken, but you can't really self-diagnose yourself with something like cancer. This video is really messy and I'm sorry. My heart is with you, like if you're self-diagnosed or you haven't been diagnosed and you don't know what's going on. I've been there. I'm not coming from a place of you don't have it, stop diagnosing yourself. I'm coming from a place of you probably do have it. If you can and if it's accessible for you, I would think it's important to get a diagnosis and be 100% sure about yourself. When I was younger, I was told, oh, it's not good to put a label on it. They were in the process of diagnosing me, but they weren't telling me anything. For the longest time, they were leaving me in the dark. I felt like a diagnosis and a label would really clear things up in my mind, because I know what it feels like to not know what the hell is going on. You want to know something so you can find a little community, find some support, know how to go further in your treatment. Another way of wording it, rather than I have BPD for example, you could say I have symptoms of BPD. Yes, no one knows what you're experiencing. No one knows the emotions you feel, the thoughts you have. No one knows what's going on in your head other than you, but doctors have been going to school for years to try and understand what goes on in people's heads. So when you're self-diagnosed, you might go to this community, this group of people, immerse yourself, watch so many videos to later find out you might not actually have it, or you have a different illness. A lot of people find out that they don't actually have what they thought they had. For example, like Tumblr and TikTok, I think it can be a very scary place for mental illness content. It can almost create a sense of anti-recovery because people like to share their trauma so much. And I feel like that could be dangerous because you're not 100% certain you have it. For BPD in particular, there are so many mental illnesses that are extremely similar. Autism spectrum disorder is actually extremely similar. There's a lot of similar symptoms. ADHD, extremely similar to BPD. A main symptom of ADHD is emotional dysregulation. Bipolar and BPD, extremely similar. Complex PTSD, extremely similar to BPD. You really don't know. You almost do have to put trust in these professionals, and not all professionals are perfect. There's a lot of people in the self-diagnosis community that think that if you're siding with the doctors, you're siding with oppressors. All doctors are evil and these medicine men are out to get you. Not every doctor's perfect, but if you're like claiming that all doctors are evil, out to get you, they're not on your side. They haven't worked 8 years for no reason. I know there's bad GPs and doctors. I've had bad experiences with doctors before, but to like lump all of them as evil and like oppressors is really problematic, because a lot of doctors save lives, diagnose people with these chronic illnesses with the highest death rates. That does save lives, and they give you treatment. Having gone through the mental health system, I went through CAMS, I understand how exhausting it is. And I can't even begin to understand how expensive it must be like outside the UK. And I have so much empathy for those who are self-diagnosed. I know exactly where you're coming from. So this is in no way hate at all. And I'm sorry if I come across harsh. To the person who commented kind of like talking about their opinions on my disclaimer, I really appreciate your comment and it kind of inspired this video. So thank you very much. If you're self-diagnosed with depression and anxiety, depression and anxiety is extremely common, and I feel like everyone has it. Mental illness is a spectrum. So if you were to self-diagnose with depression and anxiety, I have like even more understanding for that because of how common and how likely it is you actually have that. But when it comes to something like BPD, that is very complicated. It makes it harder for me to kind of like to know if people are self-diagnosing because they think it's a cool thing, and I know like for most people it's not. And I speculated that I had BPD before I was diagnosed, so like I literally have been exactly where you are, just to say like I'm 100% sure I have BPD, and not even say that you're self-diagnosed and just go along by saying I have it, I think is a little bit irresponsible, and maybe you should just, specify that you haven't been professionally diagnosed. Like you could even just say like it's expensive, I think I have this. That is 100% valid, and I really appreciate your honesty if you were to say like I'm self-diagnosed because of my situation. A lot of people who are self-diagnosed are anti-recovery as well. How can you even start to think about recovery from something that you're not certain that you have? But when I see people who are self-diagnosed and anti-recovery, like anyone who's anti-recovery, there's so much wrong with it. YouTuber Ready to Glare did a video on not only self-diagnosing but anti-recovery as well. I think she's amazing. Mental illness isn't just a label you can put on yourself. I don't like how professionals call it a label and that they don't want to label you. Like, it's not just something like a tag, like a name tag. You don't just like pick it up one day because you've googled it and you relate a little bit. Just because you relate doesn't necessarily mean you have it. For example, for years people have been saying, I want anorexia, I really want anorexia, and like trying anorexia. Or for example, I'm really tidy and neat, I love satisfying videos. You don't have OCD just because you have a clean room. Try them on like a little fashion accessory because they're trendy. Until you get a diagnosis, you are a self-diagnosed person, and unfortunately people won't take that seriously. And I know doctors are learning about all kinds of stuff, but that's just the thing. Like, you might only be researching this one illness that you have tunnel vision on because you're certain you have it, but it could be that you have a very similar illness that you didn't really know anything about. Sorry, this video is a literal mess. Hope I didn't make anyone sad or like offended anyone. That's not what I was trying to do. I just wanted to talk about like the dangers of self-diagnosing. The pros are valid. There's a lot of nuances in this conversation. There's a lot of opinions and it's a very sensitive topic. There's definitely dangers with self-diagnosing, but there's obviously dangers with getting misdiagnosed by a professional. So if healthcare and therapy is accessible to you, please do try. And I know like people who are self-diagnosed aren't out to get people with the diagnosis, and it's not like them versus us, because it's likely that we are suffering from the same illness. We're all in this together. I hope I made sense. It's all over the place. I'm really sorry for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.